I've been away for a few days at leadership training at Duke University. I am tired after getting in late last night, and I was concerned about how I could transition from leadership development in the water sector to preaching about the Beatitudes on Sunday. But when I read today's gospel, I was struck by how much overlap there is between these two worlds. You see, the past several days that I spent away were in large measure spent dealing with what in the public policy are termed wicked problems. Wicked problems are problems that are never going to go away. They are hard to define and they are extremely complex. And over the next year, each member of my cohort has chosen to pursue a wicked problem at their utility to chip away at, not to solve. Because again, these problems don't get solved, but rather what they have promised to do is to make progress on them. Many of these wicked problems had at its core an issue of equity. Now, traditionally, we talked about and built policy around equality. That is the idea that we should treat everyone the same. The idea of equality is rooted in the belief that all people have a right to have their basic physical and emotional needs met and to seek a fulfilling life. To, in religion's terms, be the person God calls them to be the image of God in their own unique way. But as much as equality is an admirable concept, it is based on a false assumption that we all start from the same place and that we all have an equal chance to succeed. But many of us had the privilege of a stable home life growing up. We had an assurance of loving parents who modeled love. And if not wealth, many of us grew up with at least a middle class lifestyle. We never had a concern that food might not be available, or that our parents' personalities might change on a dime, or lived in unsanitary conditions or in fear of violence. But that is not the case for others of us. We may have lived without the fear and constant stress that drives constant planning and adaptivity, but also shortens life spans and paralyzes upper cognitive functions. But at the same time, we recognize that others did live with those stresses. Some of us had the privileges of fitting the model of normal in our society, of being white, male, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied, college-educated, and cisgendered. While others of us had one or more characteristics that put us outside of this mold, that made our success more difficult. And not fitting that mold meant that we needed to put in an extra effort, seek out additional resources, and build extra resiliency to reach the same point that was a given for those who fit the mold. Equity seeks to correct, or at least to correct for, those societal conditions that create privileges for some and lack of privilege for others, not by cutting those with privilege down, but by building up and creating additional resources to help those with a lack of privilege access the same resources that those with privilege take for granted. But for those with privilege, it can look and feel unfair. It can seem like something that is rightfully theirs is being taken away and given to others, or that their voice is being silenced. And many of the wicked problems that I and my colleagues brought forward dealt with this tension of creating opportunities and supports for those who have been deprived of privilege without alienating and unfairly penalizing those with privilege. And the problems dealt with how a group of people who have had to deal with different types of lack of privilege ourselves and now find ourselves in the privileged position of being leaders in the water sector use that privilege to make that change. Now, this all seems like very modern problems, and just me rambling off about what I did this week. But really, this is what the gospel today is about as well. You see, when we read the Beatitudes, we tend to be comfortable with the first half, with the blessed are theys. We can see ourselves in those people that people hate now, or those that weep now, and we can look forward to our reward in heaven. And we rejoice for those whose our society put aside, for the poor and the hungry. Their lot today in the here and now might be hard, but in heaven, God will provide for them. But then we get to the woes, and we try to cut these words of Jesus out. We do not like the idea of a mean Jesus, or a Jesus who preaches condemnation, of a Jesus who warns the rich, those who do not need to worry about having food on their plate, those who are enjoying life, and those whom society praises that the world to come will bring suffering. Some of us are in those categories. We have been taught to look forward to heaven, but these woes make it seem like that may not be in the cards for us. But I think when we hear Jesus' words in these ways, we are missing the point. We are falling into the trap that I talked about earlier in regard to privilege. I do not think that Jesus so much meant that the privilege of being free from poverty, hunger, and devastation will be taken away, but rather that it might seem like that way in heaven when all are given the privileges that we already have and that we have taken for granted. It can be devastating when we judge ourselves based on how we are doing in comparison to others rather than on our own fulfillment, and are suddenly all the same level. And so the challenge to us is to let go of what society has taught us to strive for and be fulfilled in having enough, and to lift up all people to have enough. Amen.